Part 4. Chapter 48. 15th of July, 1257. Maffeo has this habit of looking at me strangely sometimes. It's as though he believes I'm not quite furnishing him with all the necessary information, and he has done this several times during our storytelling sessions. Whether watching the world go by in the busy market of Masyaf, enjoying the cool draughts in the catacombs beneath the citadel, or strolling along the ramparts, seeing birds wheel and dip across the valleys, he looks at me every now and then as if to say, "What is it you're not telling me, Niccolo?" Well, the answer, of course, is nothing, apart from my lingering suspicion that the story will eventually involve us in some way, that I'm being told these things for a reason. Will it involve the apple? Or perhaps his journals? Or the Codex, the book into which he has distilled his most significant findings? Even so, Maffeo fixes me with the look. And what, brother? Did Altaïr and Maria go east? Maffeo, Maria is the mother of Darim, the gentleman who invited us here. I watched as Maffeo turned his head to the sun and closed his eyes to let it warm his face as he absorbed this information. I'm sure that he was trying to reconcile the image of the Darim we knew, a man in his 60s with a weathered face to prove it, with someone who had a mother like Maria. I let him ponder, smiling indulgently. Just as Maffeo would pester me with questions during the tale, so, of course, I had pestered the master, albeit with a good deal more deference. "Where is the apple now?" I had asked him once. If I'm honest, I had secretly hoped that at some point he would produce it. After all, he'd spoken about it in terms of such reverence, even sounding fearful of it at times. Naturally, I had hoped to see it for myself, perhaps to understand its allure. Sadly, this was not to be. He met my question with a series of testy noises. I should not trouble myself with thoughts of the apple, he had warned with a wagging finger. I should concern myself with the Codex instead. For contained in those pages were the secrets of the apple, he said, but free of the artifact's malign effects. The Codex. Yes, I had decided it was the Codex that was to prove significant in the future. Significant in my future, even. But anyway, back in the here and now, I watched Maffeo mull over the fact that Darim was the son of Altaïr and Maria, that from adversarial beginnings had flourished first a respect between the pair, then attraction, friendship, love, and... "Marriage," said Maffeo. "She and Altaïr were wed." Indeed. Some 2 years after the events I've described, they were wed at Limassol. The ceremony was held there as a measure of respect to the Cypriots who had offered their island as a base for the assassins, making it a key stronghold for the order. I believe Marcos was a guest of honour, and a somewhat ironic toast was proposed to the pirates, who had inadvertently been responsible for introducing him to Altaïr and Maria. Shortly after the wedding, the assassin and his bride returned to Masyaf, where their son Darim was born. Their only son? No. 2 years after the birth of Darim, Maria gave birth to another, Seth, a brother to Darim. And what of him? All in good time, brother, all in good time. Suffice to say for now that this represented a mainly peaceful and fruitful period for the master. He talks of it little, as though it is too precious to bring out into the light, but much of it is recorded in his codex. All the time he was making new discoveries, and was in receipt of fresh revelations. Such as? He recorded them in his journals. In there you can see not only compounds for new assassin poisons, but for medicine too. Descriptions of achievements yet to come, and catastrophes yet to happen. Designs for armour and for new hidden blades, including one that fires projectiles. He mused upon the nature of faith, and of humanity's beginnings, forged from chaos, order imposed not by a supreme being, but by man. Maffeo looked shocked. Forged from chaos. Order imposed not by a supreme being. The assassin questions all fixed faith, I said, not without a touch of pomposity. Even his own. How so? Well, the master wrote of the contradictions and ironies of the assassin. How they seek to bring about peace, yet use violence and murder as the means to do it. How they seek to open men's minds, yet require obedience to a master. The assassin teaches the dangers of blindly believing in established faith, but requires the order's followers to follow the creed unquestioningly. He wrote also of the ones who came before, the members of the first civilization, who left behind the artifacts hunted by both Templar and assassin. The apple being one of them. Exactly. A thing of immense power. Competed for by the Knights Templar. His experiences in Cyprus had shown him that the Templars, rather than trying to wrest control by the usual means, had chosen subterfuge for their strategy. Altaïr concluded that this, too, should be the way of the assassin. No longer should the order build great fortresses and conduct lavish rituals. These, he decided, were not what makes the assassin. What makes the assassin is his adherence to the creed. That originally espoused by al-Mualim, ironically enough. An ideology that challenged established doctrines. One that encouraged acolytes to reach beyond themselves and make the impossible possible. It was these principles that Altaïr developed and took with him in the years he spent travelling the Holy Land, stabilizing the order, and instilling in it the values he had learned as an assassin. Only in Constantinople did his attempts to promote the way of the assassin stumble. There, in 1204, great riots were taking place as the people rose up against the Byzantine Emperor Alexius, and not long after that the Crusaders broke through and began a sack of the city. In the midst of such ongoing tumult, Altaïr was unable to carry out his plans, and retreated. It became one of his few failures during that era. Funny, when he told me that, he gave me an odd look. Because our home is in Constantinople? Possibly. I shall have to give the matter thought at a later date. It may well be that our hailing from Constantinople and his attempt to establish a guild there are not unrelated. His only failure, you say? Indeed. In all other ways, Altaïr did more to promote the order than almost any leader before him. It was only the ascendancy of Genghis Khan that prevented him continuing his work. How so? Some 40 years ago, Altaïr wrote of it in his codex, how a dark tide was rising to the east, an army of such size and power that all the land was made quick with worry. He was talking about the Mongol Empire, asked Maffeo. The rise of Genghis Khan. Exactly, I said. Darim was in his early 20s and an accomplished bowman, and so it was that Altaïr took him and Maria and left Masyaf. To confront Khan. Altaïr suspected that Genghis Khan's progress might have been helped by another artifact, similar to the apple. Perhaps the sword. He needed to establish whether this was the case, as well as to stop Khan's inexorable march. How was Masyaf left? Altaïr put Malik in charge in his place. He left Seth behind also to help take care of affairs. Seth had a wife and 2 young daughters by then. Darim did not, and they were gone for a long time. How long? He was absent for 10 years, brother, and when he returned to Masyaf, everything there had changed. Nothing would ever be the same again. Do you want to hear about it? Please continue. Chapter 49. From a distance, all looked well with Masyaf. None of them, not Altaïr, Maria, or Darim, had any idea of what was to come. Altaïr and Maria rode a little ahead, side by side, as was their preference, happy to be with one another and pleased to be within sight of home, each undulating with the slow, steady rhythm of their horses. Both rode high and proud in the saddle despite the long, arduous journey. They might have been advancing in years, both were in their mid-60s, but it would not do to be seen slouching. Nevertheless, they came slowly. Their mounts were chosen for their strength and stamina, not speed, and tethered to each, was an ass laden with supplies. Behind them came Darim, who had inherited the bright, dancing eyes of his mother, his father's colouring and bone structure, and the impulsiveness of both. He would have liked to gallop ahead and climb the slopes of the village to the citadel to announce his parents' return, but instead trotted meekly behind, respecting his father's wishes for a modest homecoming. Every now and then he swatted the flies from his face with his crop, and thought that a gallop would have been the most effective way to rid himself of them. He wondered if they were being watched from the spires of the fortress, from its defensive tower. Passing the stables, they went through the wooden gates and into the market, finding it unchanged. They came into the village, where children rushed excitedly around them, calling for treats, children too young to know the master. Older villagers recognized him, though, and Altaïr noticed them watching the party carefully, not with welcome, but wariness. Faces were turned away when he tried to catch their eye. Anxiety bit into his gut. Now a figure he knew was approaching them, meeting them at the bottom of the slopes to the citadel. Swami. An apprentice when he'd left, one of those who was too fond of combat, not enough of learning. He had collected a scar in the intervening 10 years, and it wrinkled when he smiled, a broad grin that went nowhere near his eyes. Perhaps he was already thinking of the teachings he would have to endure with Altaïr, now that he had returned. But endure them he would, thought Altaïr, his gaze going past Swami to the castle, where a vast flag bearing the mark of the assassins fluttered in the breeze. He had decreed that the flag be removed. The assassins were disposing of such empty emblems. But Malik had evidently decided it should fly. He was another who would endure some teaching in the time ahead. Altaïr, said Swami, with a bow of the head, and Altaïr decided to ignore the man's failure to address him by his correct title, for the time being, at least. How pleasant it is to see you. I trust your travels proved fruitful. I sent messages, said Altaïr, leaning forward in his saddle. Darim drew up on the other side of him so that the three formed a line, looking down at Swami. Was the order not told of my progress? Swami smiled obsequiously. Of course, of course. I asked merely out of courtesy. I expected to be met by Rauf, said Altaïr. He is most accustomed to meeting my needs. Ah, poor Rauf. Swami peered at the ground reflectively. Is something wrong? Rauf, I'm afraid, is dead of the fever these past few years. Why was I not informed? At this, Swami merely shrugged. An insolent shrug, as though he neither knew nor cared. Altaïr pursed his lips, deciding that somebody had some explaining to do, even if it wasn't to be this cur. Then let us move on. I trust our quarters are prepared. Swami bowed his head again. I'm afraid not, Altaïr. Until such time as you can be accommodated, I have been asked to direct you to a residence on the western side of the fortress. Altaïr looked first at Darim, who was frowning, then at Maria, who gazed at him with eyes that said, Beware. Something was not right. Very well, said Altaïr, cautiously, and they dismounted. Swami gestured to some servant boys who came forward to take the horses, and they began their ascent to the citadel gates. There the guards inclined their heads quickly as though, like the villagers, they were keen to avoid Altaïr's eye. But instead of proceeding up the barbican, Swami led them around the outside of the inner curtain. Altaïr regarded the walls of the citadel stretching high above them, wanting to see the heart of the order, feeling irritation build. But some instinct told him to bide his time. When they reached the residence, it was a low building sunk into the stone with a short arch at its doorway, and stairs leading down to a vestibule. The furniture was sparse, and there were no staff to greet them. Altaïr was used to modest accommodation. He demanded it, in fact. But here in Masyaf, as the assassin master, he expected his accommodation to be in the master's tower or equivalent. Bristling, he turned, about to remonstrate with Swami, who stood in the vestibule with the same obsequious grin on his face, when Maria grabbed his arm and squeezed it, stopping him. "Where is Seth?" she asked Swami. She was smiling pleasantly, though Altaïr knew that she loathed Swami, loathed him with every fibre in her body. "I would like Seth sent here at once, please." Swami looked pained. "I regret that Seth is not here. He has had to travel to Alamut. His family are accompanying him." Maria shot a look of concern to Altaïr. "What business did my brother have in Alamut?" snapped Darim, even more put out than his parents by the scant quarters. "Alas, I do not know," oozed Swami. Altaïr took a deep breath and approached Swami. The messenger's scar no longer crinkled as the sycophantic smile slid from his face. Perhaps he was suddenly reminded that this was Altaïr, the master, whose skill in battle was matched only by his fierceness in the classroom. "Inform Malik at once that I wish to see him," growled Altaïr. "Tell him he has some explaining to do." Swami swallowed, wringing his hands a little theatrically. "Malik is in prison, master." Altaïr started. "In prison? Why?" "I'm not at liberty to say, master. A meeting of the council has been called for tomorrow morning." "The what?" "With Malik imprisoned, a council was formed to oversee the order in accordance with the statutes of the Brotherhood." This was true, but even so, Altaïr darkened. "With who as its chairman?" "Abbas," replied Swami. Altaïr looked at Maria, whose eyes showed real concern now. She reached to take his arm. "And when do I meet this council?" asked Altaïr. His voice was calm, belying the storm in his belly. "Tomorrow the council would like to hear the tale of your journey and apprise you of events at the order." "And after that the council shall be dissolved," said Altaïr firmly. "Tell your council we shall see them at sunrise. Tell them to consult the statutes. The master has returned and wishes to resume leadership." Swami bowed and left. The family waited until he had gone before letting their true feelings show, when Altaïr turned to Darim and with urgency in his voice told him, "Ride to Alamut," he told him. "Bring Seth back here. He's needed at once." Chapter 50. The following day, Altaïr and Maria were about to make their way from their residence to the main tower, when they were intercepted by Swami, who insisted on leading them through the Barbican himself. As they skirted the wall, Altaïr wondered why he couldn't hear the usual noise of swordplay and training from the other side. As they came into the courtyard, he got his answer. It was because there was no swordplay or training. Where once the inner areas of the citadel had hummed with activity and life, echoing to the metallic chime of sword strikes, the shouts and curses of the instructors, now it lay almost deserted. He looked around him at the towers overlooking them, seeing black windows. Guards on the ramparts stared dispassionately down at them. The place of enlightenment and training, the crucible of assassin knowledge he had left, had all but disappeared. Altaïr's mood darkened further as he was about to make his way to the main tower, but Swami directed him instead to the steps that led up to the defence room, then into the main hall. There the council was gathered. 10 men were seated on opposite sides of a table, with Abbas at their head, a pair of empty chairs for Altaïr and Maria, wooden, high-backed chairs. They took their seats, and for the first time since entering the room, Altaïr looked at Abbas, his old antagonist. He saw something in him other than weakness and resentment. He saw a rival. And for the first time since the night that Ahmad had come to his quarters and taken his own life, Altaïr no longer pitied Abbas. Altaïr looked around the rest of the table. Just as he'd thought, the new council was made up of the most weak-minded and conniving members of the order. Those Altaïr would have preferred to be cast out. All had joined this council, it seemed, or been recruited to it by Abbas. Characteristic of them was Farim, Swami's father, who watched him from beneath hooded lids, his chin tucked into his chest. His ample chest. They had got fat, thought Altaïr, scornfully. "Welcome, Altaïr," said Abbas. "I'm sure I speak for us all when I say that I'm looking forward to hearing of your exploits in the East." Maria leaned forward to address him. "Before we say anything of our travels, we would like some answers, please, Abbas. We left Masyaf in good order. It seems that standards have been allowed to slip." "We left Masyaf in good order?" smiled Abbas, though he had not looked at Maria. He hadn't taken his gaze from Altaïr. The two were staring across the table at each other with open hostility. "When you left the Brotherhood, I seem to recall there being only one master. Now it appears we had two." "Be careful your insolence does not cost you dear, Abbas," warned Maria. "My insolence?" laughed Abbas. "Altaïr, please tell the infidel that from now on she may not speak unless directly addressed by a member of the council." With a shout of anger, Altaïr rose from his chair, which skittered back and tumbled on the stone. His hand was on the hilt of his sword, but 2 guards came forward, their swords drawn. "Guards, take his weapon," commanded Abbas. "You will be more comfortable without it, Altaïr. Are you wearing your blade?" Altaïr stretched out his arms as a guard stepped forward to take his sword. His sleeves fell away to reveal no hidden blade. "Now we can begin," said Abbas. "Please do not waste our time further. Update us on your quest to neutralize Khan." "Only once you have told me what has happened to Malik," growled Altaïr. Abbas shrugged and raised his eyebrows as if to say they were at an impasse. And of course they were. Neither man willing to concede, it seemed. With a grunt of exasperation, Altaïr began his story, rather than prolong the standoff. He related his journeys to Persia, India, and Mongolia, where he, Maria, and Darim had liaised with the assassin Kulan Gal, and told of how they had travelled to the Xia province, nearby to Jinging, which was besieged by the Mongolian army, the spread of Khan's empire, inexorable. There, he said, Altaïr and Kulan Gal had planned to infiltrate the Mongolian camp. It was said that Khan was there too. Darim found a vantage point not far from the camp, and armed with his bow, would watch over Kulan Gal and me as we made our way through the tents. It was heavily guarded, and we relied on him to dispose of any guards we alerted, or who looked as though they might raise the alarm. Altaïr gazed around the table with a challenging stare. And he performed this duty admirably. "Like father, like son," said Abbas, with more than a hint of a sneer in his voice. "Perhaps not," said Altaïr evenly. "For in the event it was I who was responsible for almost alerting the Mongolians to our presence." "Ah," said Abbas, "he is not infallible." "Nobody is, Abbas," replied Altaïr. least of all me, and I allowed an enemy soldier to come upon me. He wounded me before Kulangal was able to kill him. Getting old, Altaïr, jeered Abbas. Everybody is, Abbas, replied Altaïr. And I would have been dead if Kulangal had not managed to take me from the camp and bring me to safety. His actions saved my life. He looked carefully at Abbas. Kulangal returned to the camp. First he formulated a plan with Darim to flush Khan from his tent. Realizing the danger, Khan tried to escape on horseback, but he was brought down by Kulangal. Khan was finished with a shot from Darim. His skills as a bowman are beyond doubt, smiled Abbas. I gather you have sent him away, perhaps to Alamut? Altaïr blinked. Abbas knew everything, it seemed. He has indeed left the citadel on my orders. Whether to Alamut or not, I will not say. To see Sef at Alamut, perhaps, pressed Abbas. He addressed Swami. You told them Sef was there, I trust. As instructed, master, replied Swami. Altaïr felt something worse than worry in his gut now. Something that might have been fear. He felt it from Maria, too. Her face was drawn and anxious. Say what you have to say, Abbas, he said. Or what, Altaïr? Or my first task when I resume leadership will be to have you thrown in the dungeon. There to join Malik, maybe? I doubt that Malik belongs in prison, snapped Altaïr. Of what crime is he accused? A murder. Abbas smirked. It was as though the word thumped onto the table. Murder of whom? Asked Maria. And the reply, when it came, sounded as though it was given from far, far away. Sef, Malik murdered your son. Maria's head dropped into her hands. No, Altaïr heard someone say, then realized his own voice had spoken. I am sorry, Altaïr, said Abbas, speaking as though he was reciting something from memory. I am sorry that you have returned to hear this most tragic news, and may I say that I speak for all of those assembled when I extend my sympathy to you and your family. But until certain matters are resolved, it will not be possible for you to resume leadership of the Order. Altaïr was still trying to unravel the jumble of emotion in his head, aware of Maria beside him, sobbing. What? He said. Then louder. What? You remain compromised at this point, said Abbas. So I have taken the decision that control of the Order remains with the Council. Altaïr shook with fury. I am the master of this Order, Abbas. I demand that leadership is returned to me, in line with the statutes of the Brotherhood. They decree it be returned to me. He was shouting now. They do not, Abbas smiled. Not anymore. Chapter 51. Later, Altaïr and Maria sat in their residence, huddled together on a stone bench, silent in the near dark. They had spent years sleeping in deserts, but had never felt so isolated and alone as they did at that moment. They grieved at their lowly circumstances. They grieved that Masyaf had become neglected in their absence. They fretted for Sef's family and Darim. But most of all, they grieved for Sef. He had been stabbed to death in his bed, they said, just 2 weeks ago. There had been no time to send a message to Altaïr. The knife was discovered in Malik's quarters. He had been heard arguing with Sef earlier that day by an assassin. The name of the assassin who had heard the argument Altaïr had yet to learn. But whoever it was had reported hearing Seth and Malik arguing over the leadership of the Order, with Malik claiming that he intended to keep it once Altaïr returned. "It was news of your return that sparked the disagreement, it would seem," Abbas had gloated, revelling in Altaïr's ashen look, the quiet weeping of Maria. Seth had been heard threatening to reveal Malik's plans to Altaïr, so Malik had killed him. That was the theory. Beside him, her head tucked into his chest and her legs pulled up, Maria sobbed still. Altaïr smoothed her hair and rocked her until she quietened. Then he watched the shadows cast by the firelight flickering and dancing on the yellow stone wall, listening to the crickets from outside, the occasional crunch of guards' footsteps. A short while later, Maria awoke with a jump. He started too. He had been falling asleep himself, lulled by the leaping flames. She sat up, shivering, and pulled her blanket tight round herself. "What are we going to do, my love?" she asked. "Malik," he said simply. He was staring at the wall with sightless eyes and spoke as though he hadn't heard the question. "What of him?" "When we were younger, the assignment in the Temple Mount. My actions caused him great pain." "But you learned," she said, "and Malik knew that. From that day a new Altaïr was born, who led the Order into greatness." Altaïr made a disbelieving sound. "Greatness? Really?" "Not now, my love," she said. "Maybe not now, but you can restore it to how it was before all of this. You are the only one who can do it, not Abbas." She said his name as though she had tasted something especially unpleasant. "Not some council. You, Altaïr. The Altaïr I've watched serve the Order for more than 30 years. The Altaïr who was born on that day." "It cost Malik his brother," said Altaïr. "His arm, too." "He forgave you and has served as your trusted lieutenant ever since the defeat of Al-Mualim." "What if it was a facade?" said Altaïr, voice low. He could see his own shadow on the wall, dark and foreboding. She jerked away from him. "What are you saying?" "Perhaps Malik has nurtured a hatred of me all these years," he said. "Perhaps Malik has secretly coveted the leadership, and Seth discovered that." "Yes, and perhaps I'll grow wings in the night and fly," said Maria. "Who do you think really nurses a hatred for you, Altaïr? It's not Malik, it's Abbas." "The knife was found in Malik's bed," said Altaïr. "Put there, of course, to implicate him, either by Abbas or by someone in his thrall. I wouldn't be at all surprised if Swami was the man responsible for it." "And what of this assassin who heard Malik and Seth arguing? When is he to be produced? When we see him, do you think we'll discover that he's an ally of Abbas? Perhaps the son of another council member? And what of poor Rauf? I wonder if he really died of the fever. Shame on you for doubting Malik, when all of this is so obviously the work of Abbas." "Shame on me," he rounded on her, and she pulled away. Outside, the crickets stopped their noise as though to hear them argue. "Shame on me for doubting Malik. Do I not have past experience of those I love turning against me, and for reasons far more fragile than Malik has? Abbas I loved as a brother, and I tried to do right by him. Al-Mualim betrayed the whole Order, but it was me he had taken as a son. Shame on me for being suspicious? To be trusting is my greatest downfall. Trusting in the wrong people." He looked hard at her, and she narrowed her eyes. "You must destroy the apple, Altaïr," she said. "It's twisting your mind. It is one thing to have a mind that is open. It is quite another to have one so open that the birds can shit into it." He looked at her. "I'm not sure that that's how I would have put it," he said. a sad smile forming. "Perhaps not, but even so." "I need to find out, Maria," he said. "I need to know for sure." He was aware that they were being watched, but he was an assassin, and he knew Masyaf better than anyone. So it was not difficult for him to leave the residence, make his way up the wall of the inner curtain, and squat in the shadows of the ramparts until the guards had moved past. He controlled his breathing. He was still quick and agile. He could still scale walls. But perhaps not with the same ease he once had. He would do well to remember that. The wound he'd received in Genghis Khan's camp had slowed him down too. It would be foolish to overestimate his own abilities and find himself in trouble because of it, flat on his back like a dying cockroach, hearing guards approach because he'd mistimed a jump. He rested a little before continuing along the ramparts, making his way from the western side of the citadel to the south tower complex. Staying clear of guards along the way, he came to the tower, then climbed down to the ground. He moved to the grain stores, where he located a flight of stone steps that led to a series of vaulted tunnels below. There he stopped and listened, his back flat against the wall. He could hear water flowing along the small streams that ran through the tunnels. The Order's dungeons were not far away, so rarely used that they would have been kept as storerooms were it not for the damp. Altaïr fully expected Malik to be their only occupant. He crept forward until he could see the guard. He was sitting in the tunnel with his back against a side wall of the cell block, head lolled in sleep. He was some way from the cells, and didn't even have them in his eye line, so exactly what he thought he was guarding was hard to say. Altaïr found himself simultaneously outraged and relieved at the man's sloppiness. He moved stealthily past him, and it swiftly became clear why he was sitting so far away. It was the stink. Of the 3 cells, only the middle one was fastened, and Altaïr went to it. He was not sure what he was expecting to see on the other side of the bars, but he was certain of what he could smell, and held a hand over his nose. Malik was curled up in the rushes that had been spread on the stone and did nothing to soak up the urine. He was clothed in rags, looking like a beggar. He was emaciated and, through his tattered shirt, Altaïr could see the lines of his ribs. His cheekbones were sharp outcrops on his face. His hair was long, his beard overgrown. He had been in the cell for far longer than a month. That much was certain. As he gazed at Malik, Altaïr's fists clenched. He had planned to speak to him to determine the truth, but the truth was there on his jutting ribs and tattered clothes. How long had he been imprisoned? Long enough to send a message to Altaïr and Maria. How long had Sef been dead? Altaïr preferred not to think about it. All he knew was that Malik wasn't spending another moment there. When the guard opened his eyes, it was to see Altaïr standing over him. Then, for him, the lights went out. When he next awoke, he would find himself locked inside the piss-stinking cell, fruitlessly shouting for help, with Malik and Altaïr long gone. "Can you walk, my friend?" Altaïr had said. Malik had looked at him with blurry eyes. All the pain in those eyes. When he had eventually focused on Altaïr, a look of gratitude and relief had come to his face, so sincere that if there had been the slightest doubt in Altaïr's mind, it was banished at once. "For you, I can walk," said Malik, and attempted a smile. But as they made their way back along the tunnel, it had soon become clear that Malik did not have the strength to walk. Instead, Altaïr had taken his good arm, brought it around his shoulders, and carried his old friend to the ladders of the tower, then across the ramparts, eventually descending the wall on the western side of the citadel, avoiding guards along the way. At last they arrived back at the residence. Altaïr looked first one way, then the other, before he let himself in. Chapter 52. They laid Malik on a pallet, and Maria sat at his side, giving him sips from a beaker. "Thank you," he gasped. His eyes had cleared a little. He pulled himself up in the bed, seeming uncomfortable with Maria's proximity, as though he thought it dishonourable to be tended by her. "What happened to Seth?" asked Altaïr. With 3 of them inside it, the room was small. Now it became smaller, seeming to close in on them. "Murdered," said Malik. 2 years ago, Abbas staged his coup. He had Seth killed, then placed the murder weapon in my room. Another assassin swore that he'd heard Seth and me arguing, and Abbas brought the order to the conclusion that it was I who was responsible for Seth's murder. Altaïr and Maria looked at one another. For 2 years their son had been dead. Altaïr felt rage bubbling within him and strove to control it. To control the impulse to turn, leave the room, go to the fortress and cut Abbas, watch him beg for mercy and bleed to death. Maria put a hand to his arm, feeling and sharing his pain. "I'm sorry," said Malik. "I couldn't send a message while I was in prison. Besides, Abbas controlled all communications in and out of the fortress. No doubt he has been busy changing other ordinances during my imprisonment, for his own benefit." "He has," said Altaïr. "It seems he has supporters on the council." "I'm sorry, Altaïr," said Malik. "I should have anticipated Abbas's plans. For years after your departure, he worked to undermine me. I had no idea he had managed to command such support. It would not have happened to a stronger leader. It would not have happened to you." "Don't trouble yourself. Rest, my friend," said Altaïr, and he motioned to Maria. In the next room the 2 of them sat, Maria on the stone bench, Altaïr on a high-backed chair. "Do you know what you have to do?" said Maria. "I have to destroy Abbas," said Altaïr. "But not for the purposes of vengeance, my love," she insisted, looking deep into his eyes. "For the order, for the good of the Brotherhood. To take it back and make it great once more. If you can do that, and if you can let it take precedence over your own thoughts of revenge, the Order will love you as a father who shows it the true path. If you let yourself be blinded by anger and emotion, how can you expect them to listen when what you teach is the other way?" "You're right," he said, after a pause. "Then how shall we proceed?" "We must confront Abbas. We must dispute the accusation made against our son's murderer. The Order will have to accept that, and Abbas will be forced to answer for himself. It will be the word of Malik against Abbas and his agent, whoever that is." "A weasel like Abbas! His agent is even less trustworthy, I should imagine. The Brotherhood will believe you, my love. They will want to believe you. You are the great Altaïr. If you can resist your desire for revenge, if you can take back the Order by fair means, not foul, then the foundations you lay will be even stronger." "I shall see him now," said Altaïr, standing. They checked to make sure that Malik was asleep, then left, taking a torch. With early morning mist swirling at their feet, they walked fast around the outside of the inner curtain, and then to the main gate. Behind them were the slopes of Masyaf, the village empty and silent, yet to awake from its slumber. A sleepy assassin guard looked them over, insolent in his indifference, and Altaïr found himself fighting his rage. But they passed the man, climbed the barbican, and went into the main courtyard. A bell sounded. It was not a signal Altaïr knew, He raised his torch and looked around, the bells still ringing. Then he sensed movement from within the towers overlooking the courtyard. Maria urged him on, and they came to the steps leading to the dais outside the master's tower. Now Altaïr turned and saw that white-robed assassins carrying flaming torches were entering the courtyard behind them, summoned by the bell, which stopped suddenly. "I wish to see Abbas," Altaïr told the guard at the door to the tower, his voice loud and calm in the eerie silence. Maria glanced behind, and at her sharp intake of breath, Altaïr turned. He gasped. The assassins were assembling. All were looking at himself and Maria. For a moment he wondered if they were in some kind of thrall. But no. The apple was with him, safely tucked into his robe, and dormant. These men were waiting. For what? Altaïr had a feeling he was soon to find that out. Now the door to the tower was opening, and Abbas was standing before them. Altaïr felt the apple. It was almost as though a person were prodding him in the back. Perhaps it was reminding him of its presence. Abbas strode onto the platform. "Please explain why you broke into the Order's cells." He was addressing the crowd as much as Altaïr and Maria. Altaïr glanced behind him and saw that the courtyard was full. The assassins' torches were like balls of flame in the dark. So Abbas meant to discredit him in front of the Order. But Maria had been correct. He wasn't up to the task. All Abbas had achieved was to accelerate his own downfall. "I meant to establish the truth about my son," said Altaïr. "Oh, really?" smiled Abbas. "Are you sure it wasn't to exact revenge?" Swami had arrived. He climbed the steps to the platform. He was holding something in a burlap sack that he handed to Abbas, who nodded. Altaïr looked at the sack, warily, his heart hammering. Maria, too. Abbas peered into the sack and gave a look of mock concern at what he saw inside. Then, with a theatrical air, he reached in and paused for a moment to enjoy the frisson of anticipation that ran through the assembly like a shiver. "Poor Malik," he said, and pulled out a disembodied head. The skin at the neck was ragged and dripping fresh blood. The eyeballs had rolled up, and the tongue protruded slightly. "No!" Altaïr started forward, and Abbas motioned to the guards, who rushed forward, grabbing Altaïr and Maria, disarming Altaïr, and pinning his hands behind his back. Abbas dropped the head back into the sack and tossed it aside. "Swami heard you and the infidel plotting Malik's death. What a shame we could not reach Malik in time to prevent it." "No!" shouted Altaïr. "Lies! I would never have killed Malik." Pulling at the guards who held him, he indicated Swami. "He's lying." "Is the dungeon guard lying too?" said Abbas. "The one who saw you drag Malik from his cell? Why did you not kill him there and then, Altaïr? Did you want to make him suffer? Did your English wife want to make vengeful cuts of her own?" Altaïr struggled. "Because I did not kill him," he shouted. "I learned from him that it was you who ordered the murder of Seth." And suddenly he knew. He looked at Swami and saw his scorn, and knew that he had killed Seth. He felt the apple at his back. With it he could lay waste to the courtyard, kill every treacherous dog among them. They would all feel his fury. But no. He had promised never to use it in anger. He had promised Maria he wouldn't allow his thoughts to be clouded by vengeance. "It is you who has broken the creed, Altaïr," said Abbas. "Not I. You are unfit to lead the order. I hereby assume leadership myself." "You can't do that," scoffed Altaïr. "I can." Abbas came down from the platform, reached for Maria, and pulled her to him. In the same movement he produced a dagger that he held to her throat. She scowled and struggled, cursing him, until he jabbed the dagger at her neck, drawing blood and calming her. She held Altaïr's gaze over his arm, sending messages with her eyes, knowing that the apple would be calling to him. She, too, had realized that Swami had killed Seth. Just like Altaïr, she would crave retribution. Her eyes pleaded with him to keep calm. "Where is the apple, Altaïr?" said Abbas. "Show me, or I shall open the infidel a new mouth." "Do you hear this?" called Altaïr over his shoulder to the assassins. "Do you hear how he plans to take the leadership? He wants the apple not to open minds, but to control them." It was searing his back now. "Tell me now, Altaïr," repeated Abbas. He prodded harder with the dagger, and Altaïr recognized the knife. It had belonged to Abbas's father. It was the dagger Ahmad had used to cut his own throat in Altaïr's room a whole lifetime ago. And now it was being held to Maria's. He fought to control himself. Abbas pulled Maria along the dais, appealing to the crowd. "Do we trust Altaïr with the piece of Eden?" he asked them. In return there was a non-committal murmur. "Altaïr, who exercises his temper in place of reason. Should he not be compelled to hand it over without recourse to this?" Altaïr craned to see over his shoulder. The assassins were shifting uncomfortably, talking among themselves, still in shock at the turn of events. His eyes went to the burlap bag, and then to Swami. There was blood on Swami's robes, he noticed, as though he'd been hit by a fine spray of it. Malik's blood. And Swami was grinning, his scar crinkled. Altaïr wondered if he had grinned when he stabbed Seth. "You can have it," called Altaïr. "You can have the apple." "No, Altaïr," cried Maria. "Where is it?" asked Abbas. He remained at the end of the dais. "I have it," said Altaïr. Abbas looked concerned. He pulled Maria closer to him, using her as a shield. Blood poured from where he'd nicked her with the knife. At a nod from Abbas, the guards loosened their grip on Altaïr, who reached for the apple, bringing it from within his robe. Swami reached for it, touched it. And then, very quietly, so that only Altaïr could hear, he said, "I told Seth it was you who ordered his death. He died believing his own father had betrayed him." The apple was glowing, and Altaïr had failed to control himself. Swami, his hand on the apple, suddenly tautened, his eyes popping wide. Then his head was tilting to one side, his body shifting and writhing as though it were operated by some force inside. His jaws opened, but no words came out. The inside of his mouth glowed gold. His tongue worked within it. Then, compelled by the apple, he stepped away, and all watched as his hands went to his face, and he began to tear at the flesh there, gouging deep trenches in it with his fingernails. Blood ran from the churned skin, and still he mauled himself, as though he were attacking dough, ripping at the skin of his cheek and tearing a long flap from it, wrenching at one ear until it dangled from the side of his face. Altaïr felt the power coursing through him, as though it leaped from the apple and spread like a disease through his veins, as though it fed off his hatred and his need for revenge, then flowed from the apple into Swami. Altaïr felt all of this as an exquisite mix of pleasure and pain, that threatened to lift him off his feet, that made his head feel as if it might expand and explode, the sensation at once wonderful and terrible. So wonderful and terrible that he did not hear Maria screaming to him. Neither was he aware of her pulling away from Abbas and dashing down the dais towards him. At the same time, Swami had pulled his dagger from its sheath and was using it on himself, cutting himself with wild, broad slashes, opening wounds on his face and body, slicing into himself as Maria reached them, trying desperately to stop Altaïr using the apple. Altaïr had a second to see what was going to happen, but was too late to stop it. He saw Swami's dagger flash, and Maria, her throat exposed, suddenly spinning away with blood shooting from her neck. She folded to the wood, her arms outflung. She breathed once. As blood spread quickly around her, her shoulders heaved with a long, ragged gasp, and one hand twitched, knocking at a wooden support on the dais. At the same time, Swami fell away, his sword clattering to the floor. The apple glowed brightly once, then dimmed. Altaïr dropped to his knees beside Maria, taking her by the shoulder and turning her over. She looked at him. Her eyelids fluttered. "Be strong," she said, and died. The courtyard was silent. All that could be heard was Altaïr's sobbing as he gathered Maria to him and held her, a man crushed. He heard Abbas calling, "Men, take him!" Then he stood. Through eyes thick with tears, he saw assassins running towards the dais. On their faces was fear. He still held the apple. The crowd was in disarray. Most had drawn their swords, even though they knew steel would be useless against the apple, but better that than flee. Suddenly the urge was strong, overpowering almost, to use the apple to destroy everything he could see, including himself, because Maria was dead at his hands, and she had been his light. In one moment, in one blinding flash of rage, he had destroyed what he held most dear. The assassins paused. Would Altaïr use the apple? He could see the question in their eyes. "Get him!" screeched Abbas, and they came forward cautiously. Around Altaïr, the assassins seemed unsure whether to attack him or not, so he ran. "Archers!" screamed Abbas, and the bowmen snatched their shots as Altaïr raced out of the courtyard. Arrows hailed down around him, one slicing his leg. From left and right more assassins came running, their robes flowing, swords held. Perhaps now they understood that Altaïr would not use the apple a second time, and they leaped from walls and railings to join the pursuit. Fleeing, Altaïr came to the arch and found it blocked. He turned, doubled back, and barreled through two assassins in pursuit, one swinging his blade and opening a wound on his arm. He screamed in pain but kept going, knowing they could have had him. He'd surprised them, but they were scared to attack him, or reluctant to do so. He turned again, this time heading for the defensive tower. In it he could see archers taking aim, and they were the best, he knew. Trained by the best. They never missed. Not with the amount of time they had to aim and fire. Except he knew when they would fire. He knew that it took them a heartbeat to find their target, and a second heartbeat to steady and breathe. Then, fire. He swerved and rolled. A volley of arrows slammed into the ground he'd just left, all but one missing him. One of the archers had checked his aim, and the arrow grazed Altaïr's cheek. Blood sluiced down his face as he hit the ladder, scampering up it and reaching the first level, where a surprised bowman was dithering over whether to draw his sword. Altaïr dragged him from his perch, and he somersaulted to the ground below. He'd live. Now Altaïr scrabbled up the second ladder. He was in pain. He was bleeding heavily. He reached the top of the tower from which he had jumped a lifetime ago, disgraced then as he was now. He hobbled to the platform, and as men scrambled to the top of the tower behind him, he spread out his arms and dropped. Chapter 53. 10th of August, 1257. Altaïr means us to spread the word of the assassin. That is his plan. And not just spread the word, but set up an order in the West. Shame on me for taking so long to work it out. But now that I have, all seems clear. To us, specifically to me, it seems, he is entrusting the spirit of the Brotherhood. He's passing the torch to us. We have had word that warlike Mongols are approaching the village, and he thinks we should leave before hostilities commence. Maffeo, of course, seems rather titillated by the idea of witnessing the action, and I rather feel that he would prefer it if we stayed. His former wanderlust? All but gone. Our roles are reversed, it seems, for now it is I who want to leave. Either I am more cowardly than he is, or I have a more realistic idea of war's grim reality, for I find myself in accordance with Altaïr. Masyaf under siege is no place for us. In truth, I am ready to go, whether the marauding party of Mongols arrives or not. I long for home these hot nights. I miss my family, my wife and my son, Marco. He will be 3 years old in a few short months, and I am painfully aware that I have seen so little of his very earliest years. I have missed his first steps, his first words. In short, I feel that our time in Masyaf has reached its natural end. Moreover, the master has said that he wishes to see us. There is something he must give us, he says, in a ceremony he would like to conduct with other assassins present. It is something that must be kept safe, he says, and out of the hands of the enemy, the Mongols or the Templars. This is what his tales have been leading to, I realize, and I have my suspicions as to what this precious thing might be. We shall see. In the meantime, Maffeo is impatient to hear the rest of my tale, now so close to its conclusion. He pulled a face when I informed him that I planned to shift the narrative forward in time, from the moment that Altaïr leaped from the ramparts of the citadel, a shamed and broken man, to a period some 20 years hence, and not to Masyaf, but to a spot in the desert 2 days' ride away. To an endless plain at dusk, seemingly empty apart from a man on a horse, leading another horse, the second nag laden with jugs and blankets. From a distance the rider looked like a tradesman with his wares, and up close that was exactly what he was, sweating under his turban. A very tired and portly tradesman named Muklis. So when Muklis saw the waterhole in the distance, he knew he had to lie down and rest. He'd hoped to reach home without stopping, but he had no choice. He was exhausted. So many times during the journey, the rhythm of the horse had lulled him, and he had felt his chin tucking into his chest, his eyes fluttering and closing. It had been getting more and more difficult to resist sleep. Each time the motion of travel rocked him towards sleep, a fresh battle was fought between heart and head. His throat was parched. His robe hung heavy about him. Every bone and muscle in his body hummed with fatigue. The thought of wetting his lips and lying down with his taub pulled around him, for just a few hours, perhaps, enough to restore some energy before resuming the journey home to Masyaf. Well, the thought was almost too much for him. What gave him pause, however, what made him fearful of stopping, was the talk he had heard. Talk of bandits abroad, thieves preying on tradesmen, taking their goods and slitting their throats, a band of brigands led by a cutthroat named Fahad, whose legendary brutality was matched only by that of his son, Baihas. Baihas, they said, would hang his victims by their feet before slicing them from throat to belly, and letting them die slowly, the wild dogs feasting on their dangling innards. Byhas would do this, and he'd be laughing. Muklis liked his guts inside his body. Neither did he have any desire to surrender all his worldly goods to brigands. After all, things in Masyaf were hard and getting harder. The villagers were forced to pay higher and higher levies to the castle on the promontory. The cost of protecting the community was rising, they were told. The master was ruthless in demanding taxes from the people, and would often send parties of assassins down the slopes to force them to pay. Those who refused were likely to be beaten, then cast out of the gates, there to wander in the hope of being accepted at another settlement, or at the mercy of bandits who made a home of the rocky plains surrounding Masyaf, and seemed to become more and more audacious in their raids on travellers. Once the assassins, or the threat of them at least, had kept the trade routes safe. No longer, it seemed. So to return home penniless, unable to pay the tithes that Abbas demanded of the village merchants, and the levies he wanted from the people, Muklis might find himself and his family tossed out of the village. Him, his wife Alia, and his daughter Nada. He was thinking about all of this as he approached the waterhole, still undecided whether or not to stop. A horse was standing beneath a large fig tree that spread over the waterhole, a huge, inviting canopy of cool shade and shelter. It was untethered, but the blanket on its back showed that it belonged to someone. Probably a fellow traveller stopping to drink the water, refill his flasks, or perhaps, like Muklis, lay down his head and rest. Even so, Muklis was nervous as he approached the waterhole. His horse sensed the proximity of water and snorted appreciatively, so that he had to rein her back from trotting up to the well where he now saw a figure curled up asleep. He slept with his head on his pack, his robe wrapped around him, his hood pulled up and his arms crossed over his chest. Little of his face was visible, but Muklis saw brown, weathered skin, wrinkled and scarred. He was an old man, in his late 70s or early 80s. Fascinated, Muklis studied the sleeper's face. The eyes snapped open. Muklis recoiled a little, surprised and frightened. The old man's eyes were sharp and watchful. He remained absolutely still, and Muklis realized that although he himself was much younger, the stranger was not at all intimidated by him. "I'm sorry if I disturbed you," said Muklis, inclining his head, his voice wavering slightly. The stranger said nothing, just watched as Muklis dismounted, then led his horse to the well and retrieved the leather bucket so that they could drink. For a moment or so, the only sound was the soft bump of the bucket on the wall of the well as the water was fetched, then the slurping as the horse drank. Muklis drank too. He sipped, then gulped, wetting his beard and wiping his face. He filled his flasks and took water to the second horse, tethering them both. When he looked again at the stranger, he had fallen asleep once more. All that had changed about him was that he no longer lay with his arms crossed. Instead, they were by his head, resting on the pack he was using as a pillow. Muklis took a blanket from his own pack, found a spot on the other side of the well, and lay down to sleep. How much later was it that he heard movement and opened his eyes blearily to see a figure standing over him? A figure lit by the first rays of the morning sun, his black hair and beard wild and unkempt, a gold earring in one ear, and grinning a wide, evil grin. Muklis tried to scramble to his feet, but the man dropped to his haunches, a glittering dagger going to Muklis's neck, so that Muklis went still with fright, a whimper escaping from his lips. "I am Byhas," said the man, still smiling. "I am the last face you will ever see." "No," bleated Muklis. But Byhas was already hauling him to his feet, and now the trader saw that Byhas had two companions, who were stripping his horses of his goods and transferring them to their own beasts. He looked for the sleeping old man, but he was no longer there, although Muklis could see his horse. Had they killed him already? Was he lying with his throat slit? "Rope!" called Byhas. He still had the dagger held to Muklis's throat, as one of his companions tossed him a coil of rope. Like Byhas, he wore black and had an unkempt beard, his hair covered with a keffiyeh. On his back was a longbow. The third man had long hair and no beard, a wide scimitar at his belt, and was busily rooting through Muklis's packs, discarding unwanted items in the sand. "No!" cried Muklis, seeing a painted stone fall to the dirt. It had been given to him by his daughter as a good luck gift on the day he had left, and the sight of it tossed to the ground by the robber was too much for him. He pulled away from Byhas's grip and rushed to Longhair, who moved to meet him with a smile, then felled him with a vicious punch to the windpipe. The three robbers roared with laughter as Muklis writhed and choked in the dirt. "What is it?" jeered Longhair, bending to him. He saw where Muklis was looking and picked up the stone, reading the words Nada had painted on. "Good luck, Papa. Is this it? Is this what's making you so brave all of a sudden, Papa?" Muklis reached for the stone, desperate to have it, but Longhair batted his hand away with disdain, then rubbed the stone on his backside, laughing more as Muklis howled in outrage, and tossed it into the well. "Plop," he mocked. "You," started Muklis. "You!" "Tie his legs," he heard from behind him. Byhas threw Longhair the rope and came round, dropping to his haunches and placing the tip of his knife close to Muklis's eyeball. "Where were you heading, Papa?" he asked. "To Damascus," lied Muklis. Byhas sliced his cheek with the knife, and he screamed in pain. "Where were you going?" he demanded again. "His cloth is from Masyaf," said Longhair, who was winding the rope around Muklis's legs. "Masyaf, eh?" said Byhas. "Once you might have counted on the assassins for support, but no longer. Perhaps we should pay it a visit. We may find ourselves a grieving widow in need of comfort. What do you say, Papa, when we finish with you?" Now Longhair stood and tossed the end of the rope over a branch of the fig tree, hauling back on it so that Muklis was pulled up. His world went upside down. He whimpered as Longhair tied the end of the rope to the well arch, securing him there. Now Byhas reached and spun him. He revolved, seeing the bowman standing some feet away, rocking back on his heels with laughter. Byhas and Longhair closer and laughing too. Byhas bending to him. Still revolving, he saw the wall of the well go by, then came round again to see the three robbers, Longhair and Byhas, behind them the third man, and a pair of legs appeared from the tree behind the third man. But Muklis was still spinning, and the wall of the well went by again. He revolved, slowing now to the front, where all three robbers were oblivious that another man was among them, standing behind them. A man whose face was mostly hidden beneath the cowl of the robe he wore, his head slightly bowed, his arms spread, almost as though in supplication. The old man. "Stop," said the old man. Like his face, his voice was weathered with age. All three robbers turned to face him, tensing, ready to cut down the intruder. And all three began to snigger. "What is this?" scoffed Byhas. "An aged man comes to stop our fun. What do you plan to do, old man? Bore us to death with your tales of the old days? Fart at us?" His two companions laughed. "Cut him down," said the old man, indicating where Muklis still hung upside down, swaying on the rope. "At once." "And why would I want to do that?" asked Byhas. "Because I say so," rasped the old man. And who might you be to demand this of me? The old man flicked his hand. Snick. Chapter 54. The bowman reached for his bow, but in 2 strides Altaïr reached him, swiping his blade in a wide arc that opened the man's neck, slicing the bow in half and shortening his headdress with 1 cut. There was a soft clatter as the brigand's bow dropped to the ground, followed by a thump as his body joined it. Altaïr, who had not known combat for 2 decades, stood with his shoulders heaving, watching Baihas and Longhair as their expressions changed from mocking to wary. At his feet, the bowman was twitching and gurgling, his blood blotted by the sand. Without taking his eyes from Baihas and Longhair, Altaïr dropped to 1 knee and drove his blade into him, silencing him. Fear was his greatest weapon now, he knew. These men had youth and speed on their side. They were savage and ruthless, accustomed to death. Altaïr had experience. He hoped it would be enough. Longhair and Baihas shared a look. They were no longer smiling. For a moment, the only sound around the waterhole was the soft creaking of the rope on the branch of the fig tree, Mukhlis watching everything upside down. His arms were untied, and he wondered whether to try to get free, but judged it better not to draw attention to himself. The 2 thugs moved apart, wanting to outflank Altaïr, who watched the ground open up between them, revealing the merchant hanging upside down. Longhair passed his scimitar from hand to hand, with a soft slapping sound. Baihas chewed the inside of his cheek. Longhair took a step forward, jabbing with the scimitar. The air seemed to vibrate with the sound of ringing steel, as Altaïr stopped him with his blade, sweeping his arm to push the scimitar aside, feeling his muscles complain. If the thieves made short attacks, he wasn't sure how long he could last. He was an old man. Old men tended gardens, or spent afternoons pondering in their studies, reading and thinking about those they had loved and lost. They didn't get involved in sword fights, especially not when they were outnumbered by younger opponents. He stabbed towards Baihas, wanting to stop the leader outflanking him, and it worked. But Baihas darted close enough with the dagger to slice Altaïr at the chest, opening a wound, drawing the first blood. Altaïr attacked in his turn, and they clashed, trading blows but giving Longhair a chance to step in before Altaïr could ward him off. Longhair swiped wildly with his blade, making a large cut in Altaïr's leg. Big. Deep. It gushed blood, and Altaïr almost stumbled. He limped to his side, trying to bring the well to his flank in order to defend from the front only. He got there, the wall of the waterhole at his side, the hanging merchant at his back. "Have strength," he heard the merchant say quietly, "and know that whatever happens, you have my gratitude and love, whether in this life or the next." Altaïr nodded but did not turn, watching instead the 2 thugs in front of him. Seeing Altaïr bleed had cheered them, and encouraged they came forward with more stabbing, stinging sorties. Altaïr fought off 3 offensives, picking up new wounds, bleeding profusely now, limping, out of breath. Fear was no longer his weapon. That advantage was lost to him. All he had now were long-dormant skills and instincts, and he cast his mind back to some of his greatest battles, overcoming Talal's men, beating Moloch, defeating the Templar Knights in the Jerusalem cemetery. The warrior who had fought those battles would have sliced these 2 dead in seconds. But that warrior lived in the past. He had aged. Grief and seclusion had weakened him. He had spent 20 years mourning Maria, obsessed with the apple. His combat skills, great as they were, had been allowed to wither and, so it seemed, die. He felt blood in his boots. His hands were slick with it. He was swinging wildly with his blade, not so much defending as trying to swat his attackers away. He thought of his pack, secured in the fig tree, the apple inside. To grasp the apple would be to emerge the victor. But it was too far away, and, anyway, he'd vowed never to use it again. He'd left it in the tree for that very reason, to keep its temptation out of reach. But the truth was that if he'd been able to reach it, he would have used it now, rather than die like this, and surrender the merchant to them, surely condemning him to an even more painful and tortured death because of Altaïr's actions. Yes, he would have used the apple, because he was lost. And he'd allowed them to turn him again, he realized. Long Hair came at him from the periphery of his vision, and he shouted with the effort of fending him off, Long Hair meeting his parries with attacking strikes. 1, 2, 3. Finding a way beneath Altaïr's guard, and cutting yet another wound on his flank, a deep slash that bled copiously at once. Altaïr staggered, gasping with the pain. Better to die this way, he supposed, than to surrender meekly. Better to die fighting. Long Hair came forward now, and there was another clash of the sword. Altaïr was wounded again, this time on his good leg. He dropped to his knees, his arms hanging, his useless blade gouging nothing but the sand. Long Hair stepped forward, but Baihas stopped him. "Leave him to me," he ordered. Dimly, Altaïr found himself thinking of another time, 1,000 lives ago, that his opponent had said the same, and how on that occasion he had made the knight pay for his arrogance. That satisfaction would be denied him this time, because Baihas was coming forward to Altaïr, who knelt, swaying and defeated in the dirt, his head hanging. He tried to order his legs to stand, but they would not obey. He tried to lift his blade hand, but he could not. He saw the dagger coming towards him, and was able to lift his head high enough to see Baihas's teeth bared, his gold earrings shining in the early morning sun. Then the merchant was bucking, swinging, and had embraced Baihas upside down and from behind, momentarily arresting his progress. With a great shout, a final burst of effort, energy summoned from he knew not where, Altaïr thrust upward, his blade slicing up and into Baihas's stomach, opening a vertical gash that ended almost at his throat. At the same time, Mukhlis had grabbed the dagger just before it dropped from Baihas's loosening fingers, jerking upwards and slicing at the rope that held him. He dropped, smashing his side painfully against the well wall, but scrambled to his feet and stood side by side with his saviour. Altaïr was bent almost double, dying on his feet. But he raised his blade and stared narrow-eyed at Long Hair, who suddenly found himself outnumbered and unnerved. Instead of attacking, he backed away until he reached a horse. Without taking his eyes off Altaïr and Mukhlis, he mounted it. He stared at them, and they stared back. Then he very deliberately drew a finger across his throat and rode away. "Thank you," said Mukhlis to Altaïr breathlessly. But the assassin didn't answer. He had folded unconscious to the sand. Chapter 55. It was a week later when the envoy from the brigand leader arrived. The people from the village watched him ride through the township and to the hills leading up to the citadel. He was one of Farhad's men, they said, and the wiser among them thought they knew the nature of his business at the fortress. 2 days before, Farhad's men had come to the village with news of a reward offered for anyone who identified the man who had killed Farhad's son, Baihas. He had been helped by a merchant from Masyaf, they said, and the merchant would be unharmed if he produced the cowardly dog who had cut down the brigand leader's beloved son. The villagers had shaken their heads and gone about their business, and the men had left empty-handed, muttering dark warnings about their planned return. And this was it, said the gossips. At least, this was a precursor to it. Even Farhad wouldn't dare send men into the village when it enjoyed the protection of the assassins. He would have to ask the permission of the master. Even Farhad would not have dared make the request of Altaïr or Al-Mualim. But Abbas was a different matter. Abbas was weak, and could be bought. So it was that the envoy returned. On the outward journey he had looked serious, if disdainful of the villagers who watched him pass. But now he smirked at them, and drew his finger across his throat. "It seems the master has given Farhad his blessing to come into the village," said Mukhlis later that night, as the candles burned down. He sat at the bedside of the stranger, talking more to himself than to the man in the bed, who had not regained consciousness since the battle at the waterhole. Afterwards, Mukhlis had manhandled him over the saddle of his second horse, and brought him home to Masyaf in order that he might be healed. Alia and Nada had attended to him, and for 3 days they had wondered if he would live or die. Blood loss had left him as pale as mist, and he had lain in bed, Alia and Mukhlis having given up theirs for him, looking almost serene, like a corpse, as though at any moment he might have departed the world. On the 3rd day his colour began to improve. Alia had told Mukhlis so when he returned from market, and Mukhlis had taken his usual place on a chair by the side of the bed to speak to his saviour in the hope of reviving him. He'd got into the habit of recounting his day, occasionally talking of significant things in the hope of exciting the patient's unconscious mind and bringing him round. "Abbas has his price, it seems," he said now. He looked sideways at the stranger, who lay on his back, his wounds healing nicely, growing stronger by the day. "Master Altaïr would have died rather than allow such a thing," he said. He leaned forward, watching the figure in the bed very carefully. "The master, Altaïr ibn Lahad." For the first time since he had been brought to Mukhlis's home, the stranger's eyes flicked open. It was the reaction he'd hoped for, but even so, Mukhlis was taken aback, watching as the patient's cloudy eyes slowly regained their light. "It's you, isn't it?" whispered Mukhlis, as the stranger blinked, then turned his gaze on him. "You're him, aren't you? You're Altaïr." Altaïr nodded. Tears pricked Mukhlis's eyes, and he dropped from his seat to the stone floor, grasping one of Altaïr's hands in both of his own. "You've come back to us," he said between sobs. "You've come to save us." There was a pause. "Have you come to save us?" "Do you need saving?" said Altaïr. "We do." "Was it your intention to come to Masyaf when we met?" Altaïr thought. "When I left Alamut, it was inevitable I would find myself here. The only question was when." "You were in Alamut?" "These past 20 years or so. They said you were dead. That the morning Maria died, you threw yourself from the Citadel Tower." "I did throw myself off the Citadel Tower," Altaïr smiled grimly. "But I lived. I made it to the river outside the village. By chance, Darim was there. He was returning from Alamut, where he had found Sef's wife and children. He retrieved me and took me to them." "They said you were dead," said Mukhlis again. "They?" Mukhlis waved a hand that was meant to indicate the citadel. "The assassins." It suited them to say so, but they knew I was not. He disentangled his hand from Mukhlis's grasp, pulled himself to a sitting position, and swung his legs out of the bed. He looked at his feet, at their wrinkled old skin. Every inch of his body sang with pain, but he felt better. His robe had been washed and replaced on him. He pulled his hood over his head, liking the feel of it, and breathing in the scent of the clean cloth. He put his hands to his face, and felt that his beard had been tended. Not far away were his boots, and on a table by the side of the bed he saw his blade mechanism. Its new design gleamed from the apple. It looked impossibly advanced. and he thought of the other designs he had discovered. He needed the assistance of a blacksmith to make the objects. But first... "My pack," he asked of Mukhlis, who had scrambled to his feet. "Where is my pack?" Wordlessly, Mukhlis indicated where it sat on the stone at the head of the bed, and Altaïr glanced at its familiar shape. "Did you look inside?" he asked. Mukhlis shook his head firmly, and Altaïr looked at him searchingly. Then, believing him, he relaxed and reached for his boots, pulling them on, wincing as he did so. "I have you to thank for tending me," he said. "I would be dead by the waterhole were it not for you." Scoffing, Mukhlis retook his seat. "My wife and daughter cared for you, and I must thank you. You saved me from a grisly death at the hands of those bandits." He leaned forward. "Your actions were those of the Altaïr ibn Lahad of legend. I've told everyone." "People know I'm here." Mukhlis spread his hands. "Of course. The whole village knows the tale of the hero who delivered me from the hands of death. Everybody believes it was you." "And what makes them think that?" asked Altaïr. Mukhlis said nothing. Instead, he indicated with his chin the low table where Altaïr's blade mechanism shone dully, wicked and oiled. Altaïr considered. "You told them about the blade?" Mukhlis thought. "Well, yes," he said, "of course. Why?" "Word will reach the citadel. They will come looking for me." "They will not be the only ones," said Mukhlis ruefully. "What do you mean?" "A messenger from the father of the man you killed visited the fortress earlier." "And who was the man I killed?" "A vicious cutthroat called Byhas." "And his father?" "Farhad, leader of a band of brigands who roam the desert. It's said they're camped 2 or 3 days' ride away. It's from there the envoy came. They say he was asking the master's blessing to come to the village and hunt the killer." "The master," said Altaïr sharply. "Abbas." Mukhlis nodded. "A reward was offered for the killer, but the villagers spurned it. Abbas has perhaps not been so steadfast." "Then the people are of good heart," said Altaïr, "and their leader is not." "Truer words rarely spoken," agreed Mukhlis. "He takes our money and gives us nothing in return, where once the citadel was the heart of the community from which came strength, guidance, and protection," said Altaïr with a half-smile. "That too," acknowledged Mukhlis. "All those things left with you, Altaïr, to be replaced by corruption and paranoia. They say that Abbas was forced to quell an uprising after you left, a rebellion of assassins loyal to you and Malik, that he had the ringleaders put to death, that he fears a repeat of the insurrection. His paranoia makes him stay in his tower day and night, imagining plots and putting to death those he thinks responsible. The tenets of the order are crumbling around him just as surely as the fortress itself falls into disrepair. They say he has a recurring dream, that one day Altaïr ibn Lahad returns from exile in Alamut with..." He paused, looking at Altaïr askance, and casting a glance at the pack. "An artifact capable of defeating him. Is there such a thing? Do you plan an attack?" "Even if there was, it is not an artifact that will defeat Abbas. It is belief. Belief in ourselves and in the creed that will accomplish that." "Whose faith, Altaïr?" Altaïr waved an arm. "Yours. That of the people and of the assassins." "And how will you restore it?" asked Mukhlis. "By example," replied Altaïr. "A little at a time." The next day, Altaïr went out into the village, where he began not simply to preach the way of the assassins, but to demonstrate it. Chapter 56. There had been fights in which Altaïr had had to intervene, disputes between traders that had required his moderation, land arguments between neighbours, but none had been as thorny as that of the two women who appeared to be fighting over a man. The man in question, Aaron, sat on a bench in the shade, cowering as the two women argued. Mukhlis, who had walked the village with Altaïr as he went about his business, was trying to intercede, while Altaïr stood at one remove, his arms folded, patiently waiting for a break in hostilities so that he might speak to them. He'd already decided what to say. Aaron would have to exercise free will in this instance, whether he liked it or not. Altaïr's real concerns lay with the boy, whose fever had yet to break, and to whom he had administered a potion, its recipe, of course, gleaned from the apple. Or with the basket weaver who was creating new tools for himself to specifications given to him by Altaïr, who had transcribed them from the apple. Or to the blacksmith, who had cast his eye over the drawings Altaïr had given him, turned them upside down and squinted at them, then laid them out on a table so that Altaïr could point out exactly what needed forging. Soon the assassin would have new equipment, new weapons, the like of which had never been seen. Or to the man who had been watching him these past few days, who had moved with him like a shadow, staying out of sight, or so he thought. Altaïr had seen him at once, of course. He had noted his bearing, had known he was an assassin. It had had to happen, of course. Abbas would have sent his agents into the village in order to learn about the stranger who fought with the hidden blade of the assassin. Abbas would surely come to the conclusion that Altaïr had returned to reclaim the order. Maybe he hoped that the brigands would kill Altaïr for him. Maybe he would send a man down the slopes to kill him. Perhaps this shadow was also Altaïr's assassin. Still the women argued. Mukhlis said from the side of his mouth, "Master, it seems I was mistaken. These women are not arguing about who should have the unfortunate Aaron, but who should take him." Altaïr chuckled. "My judgment would remain the same," he said, casting an amused look to where Aaron sat chewing his fingernails. "It is for the young man to decide his own destiny." He stole a glance at his shadow, who sat in the shade of the trees, mud-coloured robes pulled around him, looking for all the world like a snoozing villager. To Mukhlis he said, "I shall return presently. Their talk is giving me a thirst." He turned and left the small group, some of whom were about to follow until Mukhlis surreptitiously waved them back. Altaïr sensed rather than saw his shadow stand also, following him as he walked into a square and to the fountain at its centre. There he bent, drank and stood, pretending to take in the view over the village below. Then, "It's all right," he said to the man he knew stood behind him. "If you were going to kill me, you would have done it by now." "You were just going to let me do it?" Altaïr chuckled. "I've not spent my life walking the path of a warrior in order to let myself be taken by a young pup at a fountainhead." "You heard me?" "Of course I heard you. I heard you approach with all the stealth of an elephant, and I heard that you favour your left side. Were you to attack, I should move to my right in order to meet your weaker side." "Wouldn't I anticipate that?" "Well, that would depend on the target. You would, of course, know your target well, and be aware of their combat skills." "I know that this one has combat skills unmatched, Altaïr ibn Lahad." "Do you indeed? You would have been but a child when I last called Masyaf my own." Now Altaïr turned to face the stranger, who pulled down his hood to reveal the face of a young man, perhaps 20 years old, with a dark beard. He had a set to his jaw and eyes that Altaïr recognized. "I was," said the boy. "I was a newborn." "Then were you not indoctrinated against me?" said Altaïr, jutting his chin towards the citadel on the promontory above them. It crouched there, as if watching them. "Some are more easily indoctrinated than others," said the boy. "There are many who have remained loyal to the old codes, and greater numbers as the pernicious effects of the new ways have become more pronounced. But I have even more reason to remain loyal than most." The two assassins stood facing each other by the fountainhead, and Altaïr sensed his world lurch a little. Suddenly he felt almost faint. "What is your name?" he asked, and his voice sounded disembodied to his own ears. "I have two names," said the boy. "I have the name by which I'm known to most of the Order, which is Tazim. But I have another name, my given name, given to me by my mother, to honour my father. He died when I was but a baby, put to death on the orders of Abbas. His name was Malik." Altaïr caught his breath and came forward, tears pricking his eyes as he took the boy by the shoulders. "My child," he exclaimed. "I should have known. You have your father's eyes." He laughed. "His stealth I'm not so sure about, but you have his spirit." "I didn't know. I never knew he had a son. My mother was sent away from here after he was imprisoned. As a young man I returned to join the Order. To seek revenge? Eventually, maybe. Whatever best suited his memory. Now that you have come, I see the way." Altaïr put an arm around his shoulders, steered him from the fountain, and they crossed the square, talking intently. "How are your combat skills?" he asked the young Malik. "Under Abbas such things have been neglected, but I have trained. Assassin knowledge has barely advanced in the last 20 years, though." Altaïr chuckled. "Not here, perhaps, but here." He tapped the side of his head. "Here, assassin learning has progressed tenfold. I have such things to show the Order. Plans, stratagem, designs for new weapons. Even now the village blacksmith forges them for me." Respectful villagers moved out of their way. All knew of Altaïr now, and here, in the foothills of the fortress at least, he was the master once again. "And you say there are others in the castle loyal to me," said Altaïr. "There are as many who hate Abbas as serve him. More so now that I've been reporting on what I've seen in the village. News that the great Altaïr has returned is spreading slowly but surely." "Good," said Altaïr. "And could these supporters be persuaded to rally, so that we might march upon the castle?" The young Malik stopped and looked at Altaïr, squinting as though to check the older man wasn't joking. Then he grinned. "You mean to do it? You really mean to do it? When?" "The brigand Fahad will be bringing his men into the village soon," he said. "We need to be in control before that happens." Chapter 57. The next morning, as day broke, Mukhlis, Alia and Nada went from house to house, informing the people that the master was to march up the hill. Alive with anticipation, the people gathered in the marketplace, standing in groups or sitting on low walls. After some time, Altaïr joined them. He wore his white robes and a sash. Those who looked closely could see the ring of his wrist mechanism on his finger. He moved into the centre of the square, Mukhlis standing to one side, a trusted lieutenant, and waited. What would Maria have said to him now? Wondered Altaïr as he waited. The boy, Malik. Altaïr had trusted him immediately. He'd placed such faith in him that if he were to prove treacherous, Altaïr would be as good as dead, and his plans to regain the order shown as nothing more than the deluded fantasies of an old man. He thought of those he had trusted before, who had betrayed him. Would Maria have advised caution now? Would she have told him he was foolish to be so unquestioning on such scant evidence? Or would she have said, as she had once, "Trust your instincts, Altaïr. Al-Mualim's teachings gave you wisdom. His betrayal set you on the path to maturity." "Oh, and I am so much wiser now, my love," he thought to her. To the wisp of her he kept safe in his memory. She would have approved, he knew, of what he had done with the apple, of the years spent squeezing it of juice, learning from it. She would not have approved of the blame he had shouldered for her death, the shame he felt at letting his actions be guided by anger. No, she would not have approved of that. What would she have said? That English expression she had, "Take hold of yourself." He almost laughed to think of it. Take hold of yourself. He had in the end, of course, but it had taken him years to do it. Years of hating the apple, hating the sight of it, even the thought of it, the malignant power that lay dormant within the ageless, sleek mosaic of its shell. He would stare at it, brooding for hours, reliving the pain it had brought him. Neglected, unable to bear the weight of Altaïr's suffering, Sef's wife and 2 daughters had left. He'd had word that they had settled in Alexandria. A year later, Darim had left too, driven away by his father's remorse and his obsession with the apple. He had travelled to France and England to warn leaders there that the Mongols were on the march. Left alone, Altaïr's torment had worsened. Long nights he would spend staring at the apple, as though he and it were 2 adversaries about to do battle, as though if he slept, or even took his eyes from it, it might pounce on him. In the end he had thought of that night in the garden at Masyaf, his mentor Al-Mualim slain on the marble terrace, the waterfall bubbling in the background. He remembered holding the apple for the first time, and feeling from it something not evil, but benign. The images it had produced. Strange, futuristic pictures of cultures far removed from his own in time and space, beyond the sphere of his knowledge. That night in the garden, he had instinctively understood its capacity for good. Ever since then, it had shown only its malign aspects, but that great wisdom was in there somewhere. It had needed to be located and coaxed out. It had needed an agent for its release, and Altaïr had managed to harness its power once before. Then he had been consumed with grief for Al-Mualim. Now he was consumed with grief for his family. Perhaps the apple first had to take in order to give. Whatever the answer, his studies had begun, and journal after journal was filled with his writings. Page after page of philosophies, ideologies, designs, drawings, schematics, memories. Untold candles burned down as he scratched away feverishly, stopping only to piss. For days on end he would write. Then for days on end he would leave his desk, riding out from Alamut alone, on apple errands, collecting ingredients, gathering supplies. Once, even, the apple had directed him to a series of artifacts that he retrieved and hid, telling no one of their nature or their whereabouts. He had not stopped mourning, of course. He still blamed himself for Maria's death, but he had learned from it. He felt now a purer kind of grief, a yearning for Maria and Sef, an ache that never seemed to leave him, that one day was as sharp and keen as a blade slicing 1,000 cuts on his heart, and the next was a nauseous, hollow sensation, as if a sick bird were trying to unfurl its wings in his stomach. Sometimes he smiled, though, because he thought Maria would have approved of him mourning her. It would have appealed to the part of her that had stayed a spoilt English noblewoman, who had been as adept at fixing a man with a haughty stare as she was of defeating him in combat, her withering put-downs as cutting as her blade. And of course, she would have approved that he had finally managed to take hold of himself. But most of all, she would have approved of what he was doing now, taking his knowledge and learning, and bringing them back to the Order. Had he known when he ended his exile that he had been heading back to Masyaf for that reason? He still wasn't sure. All he knew was that once here, there had been no other option. He had visited the spot where they had buried her. Malik's gravestone was not far away, tended by young Malik. Altaïr had realized that Maria, Seth, and Malik, his mother and father, even Al-Mualim, were all lost to him forever. The brotherhood, though, he could take back. But only if the young Malik was as good as his word. And standing there, feeling the excitement and expectation of the crowd like a weight he must bear upon his back, Mukhlis hovering nearby, he began to wonder. His eyes fixed on the citadel, he waited for the gates to open and the men to appear. Malik had said there would be at least 20, all of whom supported Altaïr with the same fervency he did. 20 warriors, and with the support of the people, Altaïr thought it was enough to overcome the 30 or 40 assassins still loyal to Abbas. He wondered if Abbas was up there now, in the Master's Tower, squinting to make out what was happening below. He hoped so. Throughout his life, Altaïr had refused to find gratification in the death of another. But Abbas, despite the pity he felt for him, there were the deaths of Seth, Malik, and Maria to take into account. There was also Abbas's destruction of the order. Altaïr had promised himself that he would take no pleasure, not even satisfaction, from Abbas's death. But he would take pleasure and satisfaction from the absence of Abbas when he had killed him. He could allow himself that. But only if the gates opened and his allies appeared. Around him the crowds were becoming restless. He felt the confidence and assurance with which he'd awoken, slowly ebbing away. Then he became aware of a buzz of excitement among the villagers, and his eyes went from the gates of the castle, still resolutely closed, to the square. A man in white seemed to materialize from the crowd. A man who walked up to Altaïr with his head bent, then removed his hood, grinning at him. It was young Malik. And behind came others, all like him appearing from within the crowd as though suddenly becoming visible. At his side, Mukhlis gasped. The square was suddenly full of men in white robes, and Altaïr began to laugh. Surprise, relief, and joy in that laugh, as each man came to him, inclining his head in respect, showing him blade or bow or throwing knife, showing him loyalty. Altaïr grasped young Malik by the shoulders, and his eyes shone. "I take it back," he said. "You and all your men. Your stealth is unmatched." Grinning, Malik bowed his head. "Master, we should leave at once. Abbas will soon become aware of our absence." "So be it," said Altaïr. And he climbed to the low wall of the fountain, waving away Mukhlis, who had come to his aid. Now he addressed the crowd. "For too long, the castle on the hill has been a dark and forbidding place. And today I hope to make it a beacon of light once again. With your help." There was a low murmur of appreciation, and Altaïr quietened them. "What we will not do, though, is welcome our new dawn through a veil of assassin blood. Those who remain loyal to Abbas are our enemies today, but tomorrow they will be our companions. Their friendship can only be won if our victory is merciful. Kill only if it is absolutely necessary. We come to bring peace to Masyaf, not death." With that he stepped down from the wall and walked from the square, the assassins and villagers forming up behind him. The assassins pulled their cowls over their heads. They looked grim and purposeful. The people hung further back, excited, nervous, fearful. So much depended on the outcome. Altaïr climbed the slopes that as a child he had raced up and down, he and Abbas together. As an assassin, he had run up and down, training, or on errands for the master, leaving for a mission or returning from one. Now he felt the age in his bones and in his muscles, struggling a little up the slopes, but kept going. A small party of Abbas's loyalists met them on the hills, a scouting party sent to test their mettle. At first, those men with Altaïr seemed reluctant to engage them. These were comrades they had lived and trained with, after all. Friends were pitched against each other. No doubt, if the fighting continued, family members might find themselves face to face. For long moments, the outnumbered scouting party and Altaïr's supporters faced off. The scouting party had the advantage of being on higher ground, but otherwise they were lambs sent to the slaughter. Altaïr's eyes went up to where he could just see the peak of the master's tower. Abbas would be able to see him now, surely. He would have seen the people coming up the hill towards him. Altaïr's eyes went from the citadel to the scouts, sent to fight in the name of their corrupt master. "There is to be no killing," repeated Altaïr to his men, and Malik nodded. One of the scouts grinned nastily. "Then you won't get far, old man." He darted forward with his sword swinging, coming for Altaïr, perhaps hoping to strike at the roots of the rebellion, kill Altaïr, stop the uprising. In the flap of a hummingbird's wings, the assassin had spun away from the attack, drawn his sword, and rolled around the forward impetus of his assailant's body to grab him from behind. The scout's sword dropped as he felt Altaïr's blade held to his throat, and he whimpered. "There will be no killing in the name of this old man," murmured Altaïr into the scout's ear, and propelled him forward to Malik, who caught him and wrestled him to the ground. The other scouts came forward, but with less enthusiasm, no heart for the fight. They all but allowed themselves to be captured. In moments they were either captive or unconscious. Altaïr watched the short skirmish. He looked at his hand where the scout's sword had nicked it, and surreptitiously wiped off the blood. You were slow, he thought. Next time leave the fighting to the younger men. Even so, he hoped Abbas had been watching. Now men were gathering on the ramparts. He hoped also that they had seen the events on the hill, the scouting party treated mercifully. They continued further up the slope, coming to the upland just as the gates to the fortress finally opened. More assassins poured through them, yelling and ready for the fight. Behind him he heard the villagers scream and scatter, although Mukhlis was urging them to stay. Altaïr turned to see him throw up his hands, but he couldn't blame the people for their loss of resolve. They all knew of the fearsome savagery of the assassin. No doubt they had never seen two opposing assassin armies fight, and neither did they want to. What they saw were marauding assassins come howling from the gates with bared teeth and flashing swords, their boots drumming on the turf. They saw Altaïr's supporters crouch and tense, readying themselves for action. And they took shelter, some running for cover behind the watchtower, others retreating down the hill. There was a great shout and a crash of steel as the two sides met. Altaïr had Malik as his bodyguard, and he kept an eye on the ramparts as the battle raged. The ramparts where the archers stood, perhaps 10 of them. If they opened fire, the battle was surely lost. Now he saw Abbas, and Abbas saw him. For a moment the two commanders regarded one another, Abbas on the ramparts, Altaïr down below, strong and still as rock as the battle whirled around him. The best of childhood friends turned the bitterest of enemies. Then the moment was broken, as Abbas yelled at the archers to fire. Altaïr saw uncertainty on their faces as they raised their bows. "No one must die," called Altaïr, entreating his own men, knowing that the way to win over the archers was by example. Abbas was prepared to sacrifice assassins. Altaïr was not, and he could only hope that the hearts of the archers were true. He prayed that his supporters would show restraint, that they would give the archers no reason to open fire. He saw one of his men fall, howling, his throat open, and straight away the loyalist assassin responsible was attacking another. "Him," he instructed Malik, pointing in the direction of the battle. "Take him, Malik, but be merciful, I urge you." Malik joined the battle, and the loyalist was pushed back, Malik swiping at his legs. When his opponent fell, he straddled him and delivered not a killing blow, but a strike from the hilt of his sword that knocked him senseless. Altaïr looked up to the ramparts again. He saw two of the archers lower their bows, shaking their heads. He saw Abbas produce a dagger, his father's dagger, and threaten the men with it. But again they shook their heads, lowering their bows and placing their hands to the hilts of their swords. Abbas wheeled, screaming at the archers along the rampart behind him, ordering them to cut down the defectors. But they too were lowering their bows, and Altaïr's heart leaped. Now he was urging his men forward to the gates. Still the battle continued, but the loyalists were slowly becoming aware of events on the ramparts. Even as they fought, they exchanged uncertain glances, and one by one they stepped back from combat, dropping their swords, arms held out, surrendering. The way was clear for Altaïr's party to advance on the castle. He led his men to the gates and rapped on the door with his fist. Behind him assembled the assassins, and the villagers were returning too, so the upland was thronged with people. From the other side of the castle gate there was a strange stillness. A hush descended over Altaïr's people, the air crackling with expectation, until suddenly bolts were thrown, and the great castle gates swung wide, opened by guards who dropped their swords and bent their heads in deference to Altaïr. He nodded in return, stepped over the threshold, under the arch, and walked across the courtyard to the master's tower. Behind him came his people. They spread out and flowed around the edges of the courtyard. Archers descended the ladders from the ramparts to join them, and the faces of families and servants were pressed to the windows of the towers overlooking the grounds. All wanted to witness Altaïr's return, to see his confrontation with Abbas. He climbed the steps to the platform, then moved into the entrance hall. Ahead of him, Abbas stood on the steps, his face dark and drawn, desperation and defeat all over him, like a fever. "It is over, Abbas," called Altaïr. "Order those who are still loyal to you to surrender." Abbas scoffed. "Never." At that moment the tower opened, and the last of the loyalists came from the side rooms into the hall. A dozen or so assassins and manservants. Some had skittering, frightened eyes. Others were fierce and determined. The battle was not over yet. "Tell your men to stand down," commanded Altaïr. He half-turned to indicate the courtyard, where the crowds were gathered. "You cannot possibly prevail." "I am defending the citadel, Altaïr," said Abbas. "To the last man. Would you not do the same?" "I would have defended the order, Abbas," snarled Altaïr. "Instead, you have sacrificed everything we stand for. You sacrificed my wife and son on the altar of your own spite, your blank refusal to accept the truth." "You mean my father? The lies you told about him?" "Isn't that why we're standing here? Isn't that the wellspring of your hatred that has flowed through the years, poisoning us all?" Abbas was trembling. His knuckles were white on the balustrade of the balcony. "My father left the order," he said. "He would never have killed himself." "He killed himself, Abbas. He killed himself with the dagger that you have concealed within your robe. He killed himself because he had more honor than you will ever know, and because he wouldn't be pitied. He wouldn't be pitied as you will be by all, as you rot in the Citadel dungeon. Never! Roared Abbas. He pointed a trembling finger at Altaïr. You claim you can retake the Order without loss of assassin life. Let's see you try. Kill him! And suddenly the men in the hall were surging forward when the sound of the explosion echoed around the hall and silenced everyone. The crowds in the courtyard, the assassins, the loyalists. All stared in shock at Altaïr, who stood with his arm held up as if pointing at Abbas, as though he had been engaging his blade in the direction of the steps. But instead of a blade at his wrist, there was a curl of smoke. From the steps came a short, strangled cry, and all watched as Abbas stared down at his chest, where a small patch of blood on his robe was gradually spreading. His eyes were wide with shock. His jaw worked as he tried to form words that wouldn't come. The loyalist assassins had stopped. They stared, open-mouthed, at Altaïr, who moved his arm, pointing at them so that now they could see the wrist mechanism he wore. It was a single shot, and he had used it. But they didn't know that. None had ever seen such a weapon before. Only a few even knew of its existence. And seeing it turned in their direction, the loyalists cowered. They laid down their swords. They moved past Altaïr and to the door of the tower to join the crowd, their arms held out in surrender, just as Abbas was pitching forward, tumbling down the steps, and landing with a messy thud in the hall below. Altaïr crouched over him. Abbas lay breathing heavily, one of his arms at an odd angle, as though it had snapped in the fall. The front of his robe was wet with blood. He had moments left. "You want me to ask forgiveness of you?" he asked Altaïr. He grinned, looking skeletal all of a sudden. "For taking your wife and son?" "Abbas, please, don't let your dying words be malicious." Abbas made a short, scoffing sound. "Still he tries to be virtuous." He lifted his head a little. "The first blow was struck by you, Altaïr. I took your wife and son, but only after your lies had taken much more from me." "They were not lies," said Altaïr simply. "In all these years, did you never doubt?" Abbas flinched and squeezed his eyes shut with pain. After a pause, he said, "Did you ever wonder if there is a next world, Altaïr? In moments I shall know for sure. And if there is, I shall see my father, and we will both be there to meet you when it is your time. And then there will be no doubt." He coughed and gurgled, and a bubble of blood formed at his mouth. Altaïr looked into his eyes and saw nothing of the orphan boy he had once known, saw nothing of the best friend he had once had. All he saw was a twisted creature who had cost him so much. And as Abbas died, Altaïr realized that he no longer hated or pitied him. He felt nothing. Nothing but relief that Abbas was no longer in the world. 2 days later, the brigand Fahad appeared with 7 of his men on horseback, and was met at the village gates by a party of assassins, led by Altaïr. They pulled up at the edge of the marketplace, confronted by a line of men wearing white robes. Some stood with their arms folded, others with their hands on their bows or the hilt of their swords. "So it is true. The great Altaïr ibn Lahad has resumed control of Masyaf," said Fahad. He looked weary. Altaïr bowed his head, yes. Fahad nodded slowly, as if mulling this fact over. "I had an understanding with your predecessor," he said at last. "I paid him a great deal in order that I might enter Masyaf." "Which you have done," said Altaïr pleasantly. "Ah, yes, but for a specific reason, I'm afraid," replied Fahad, with a cloudy smile. He shifted on his saddle a little. "I'm here to find my son's killer." "Which you have done," said Altaïr, just as pleasantly. The cloudy smile slid slowly from Fahad's face. "I see," he said. He leaned forward. "Then which of you is it?" His eyes moved along the line of assassins. "Have you no witness to identify your son's killer?" said Altaïr. "Can he not point out the culprit among us?" "I did," sighed Fahad ruefully, "but my son's mother had his eyes put out." "Ah," said Altaïr. "Well, he was a weasel. You may console yourself that he did little to protect your son, or indeed to avenge him once he was dead. As soon as he had 2 old men to face, instead of 1, he turned tail and ran." Fahad darkened. "You?" Altaïr nodded. "Your son died as he lived, Fahad. He enjoyed administering pain. A trait he inherited from his mother." "Ah. And she insists, incidentally, that his name be avenged." "Then there is nothing left to say," said Altaïr. "Unless you intend to make your attempt at this very moment, I shall expect you presently with your army." Fahad looked wary. "You intend to let me leave? No archers to stop me, knowing that I will return with a force to crush you?" "If I killed you, I would have the wrath of your wife to contend with," smiled Altaïr. "And besides, I have a feeling that you will change your mind about attacking Masyaf by the time you have returned to your camp." "And why might that be?" Altaïr smiled. "Fahad, if we were to do battle, then neither of us would give ground. Both of us would put more at stake than the grievance deserved. My community would be devastated, perhaps irreparably so, but so would yours." Fahad seemed to consider. "It is for me to decide, surely, the price of the grievance." "Not long ago I lost my own son," said Altaïr, "and because of that I came close to losing my people. I realized it was too high a price to pay, even for my son. If you take up arms against us, you risk making such a forfeit. I'm sure that the values of your community differ greatly from mine, but that they are just as prized as they are reluctantly surrendered." Fahad nodded. "You have a wiser head than your predecessor, Altaïr. Much of what you say makes sense, and I shall indeed consider it on the ride back. Also, I shall endeavour to explain it to my wife." He gathered up his reins and turned his horse to go. "Good luck, assassin," he said. "It's you who will need luck by the sound of it." The brigand gave another of his crooked, cloudy smiles, then left. Altaïr chuckled and looked up at the citadel on the promontory. There was much work to do. Chapter 58. 12th of August, 1257. So, we were too late to escape Masyaf before the Mongols arrived. Indeed, they have arrived. As a result, we leave for Constantinople in a matter of hours, and I'm scribbling these words as our possessions are removed by helpers to be loaded onto the carts. And if Maffeo thinks that the sharp looks he insists on throwing my way will be enough to make me lay down my quill and lend a hand, then he is mistaken. I know now that these words will be of vital importance to future assassins. They must be written down at once. It's a small skirmishing party, or so we're told, but the main force is not far away. In the meantime, the skirmishing party seems to want to make a name for itself, and has been launching small but fierce attacks, scaling the walls of the village and fighting on the ramparts before retreating. I know little of warfare, thank goodness, but it occurs to me that these short assaults may be a way of gauging our strength, or lack of it. And I wonder if the Master ever regrets his decision to weaken the citadel by disbanding the assassins. Just 2 short years ago, no mere skirmishing party would have come within 10 paces of the castle before falling to the assassin archers, or beneath the blades of the defenders. When he had wrested control of the order from Abbas, Altaïr's first task was to send for his journals. The Master's work was to be a totemic force in the rebuilding of the order, essential for providing the foundations to stop the rot at Masyaf. Under Abbas's corrupt reign, they had had none of the skills or training of old. The Brotherhood had been assassin in name only. Altaïr's first task was to restore the discipline that had been lost. Once again, the training yard echoed with the ring of steel and the shouts and curses of the instructors. No Mongol would have dared a skirmish then. But just as the Brotherhood had been restored in name and reputation, Altaïr decided that the base at Masyaf should no longer exist, and removed the assassin crest from the flagpole. His vision for the order was that the assassins should go out into the world, he said. They should operate among the people, not above them. Altaïr's son Darim arrived home in Masyaf to find just a few assassins left, most of whom were occupied in the construction of the Master's library. When it was complete, Darim was dispatched to Constantinople to locate my brother and me. Which brings us to our entrance into the story, some 80 years after it began. But it is not over yet, I feel, Maffeo said. He stood waiting for me. We were due to see the Master in the main courtyard. For what was surely the last time, we wound our way through the fortress to the courtyard, led by Altaïr's faithful steward, Mukhlis. As we arrived, I thought, what sights it has seen, this courtyard. Here was where Altaïr first saw Abbas, standing in the dead of night, pining for his stricken father. Here was where the two had fought and become enemies. Where Altaïr had been shamed in front of the order by Al-Mualim. Where Maria had died. Abbas, too. None of this would have been lost on Altaïr, who had gathered most of the assassins to hear what he had to say. Darim was among them, with his bow. The young Malik, too, and Mukhlis, who took his place beside the Master on the dais outside his tower. Nerves fluttered like moths in my stomach, and I found myself taking short, jagged breaths to try to control them, finding the background noise of battle disconcerting. The Mongols, it seemed, had chosen this moment to launch another of their attacks on the castle, perhaps aware that its defences were temporarily depleted. "Brothers," said Altaïr, standing before us. "Our time together was brief, I know, but I have faith that this codex will answer any questions you have yet to ask." I took it and turned it over in my hands, in awe of it. It contained the Master's most important thoughts, distilled from decades of studying the apple. "Altaïr," I said, barely able to form words, "this gift is invaluable. Grazie." At a sign from Altaïr, Mukhlis stepped forward with a small bag that he handed to the Master. "Where will you go next?" asked Altaïr. "To Constantinople for a time. We can establish a guild there before returning to Venice." He chuckled. "Your son, Marco, will be eager to hear his father's wild stories." "He is a little young for such tales, but one day soon. See." I grinned. He passed the bag to me, and I felt several heavy objects inside it shift. "A last favour, Niccolo. Take these with you, and guard them well. Hide them if you must." I raised my eyebrows. implicitly asking his permission to open the bag, and he nodded. I peered inside, then reached in and removed a stone, one of 5. Like the others, it had a hole in its centre. Artifacts, I asked. I wondered if these were the artifacts he had found during his exile at Alamut. Of a kind, said the master. They are keys, each one imbued with a message. A message for whom? I wish I knew, said Altaïr. An assassin came hurrying into the courtyard and spoke to Darim, who moved forward. Father, a vanguard of Mongols has broken through. The village is overrun. Altaïr nodded. Niccolo, Maffeo, my son will escort you through the worst of the fighting. Once you reach the valley, follow its course until you find a small village. Your horses and provisions are waiting for you there. Be safe, and stay alert. Likewise, master. Take care of yourself. He smiled. I'll consider it. And with that, the master was gone, already barking orders to the assassins. I wondered if I would ever see him again as I shouldered a bag of strange stones and held the priceless codex tight. What I remember then is an impression of bodies, of shouting, of the ringing of steel, as we were hurried to a residence. And there I huddled in a corner to scribble these words, even as the battle raged outside. But now I shall have to go. I can only pray that we will escape with our lives. Somehow I think we will. I have faith in the assassins. I only hope that I am worthy of Altaïr's faith. In that respect, only time will tell. 1st of January, 1258. The first day of a new year, and it is with mixed emotions that I wipe the dust from the cover of my journal and begin a clean page, unsure whether this entry marks a fresh beginning or acts as a postscript to the tale that precedes it. Perhaps that is for you, the reader, to decide. The first news I have to impart I deliver with a heavy heart. We have lost the codex. That which was given to us by Altaïr on the day of our departure, entrusted to our care, is in the hands of the enemy. I shall always be tortured by the moment that I lay bleeding and weeping in the sand, watching the dust kicked up by the hoofs of the Mongol attacking party, one of whom brandished the leather satchel in which I kept the codex, its strap cut. 2 days out of Masyaf, with our safety assured, or so it had seemed, they had struck. Maffeo and I escaped with our lives, though only just, and we took a little solace from the fact that our time with the master had given us, if not the learning we might have taken from the codex, the faculties to seek out and interpret knowledge for ourselves. We resolved that soon we should go east and retrieve it, and thus, alas, delay my earliest opportunity to return to Venice and see my son Marco. But that first we should attend to business in Constantinople, for there was much to do. Ahead of us lay at least 2 years' work, which would be even more demanding without the wisdom of the Codex to guide us. Even so, we decided that, yes, we had lost the book, but in our heads and hearts, we were assassins, and we were to put our freshly acquired experience and knowledge to good use. Thus, we have already chosen the site for our trading post, a short jaunt northwest of Hagia Sophia, where we aim to supply the highest quality goods, but of course. Meanwhile, we shall begin to spread and disseminate the creed of the assassin, just as we pledged to do. And at the same time as we begin the process of starting the new guild, we have also set about hiding the 5 stones given to us by Altaïr. The keys. Guard them well, he had said, or hide them. After our experiences with the Mongols, we had decided that the keys should be hidden, so we set about secreting them around and about Constantinople. We are due to hide the last one today, so by the time you read this, all 5 keys will be safely hidden from the Templars, for an assassin of the future to find, whoever that may be. Epilogue. From above him on deck, the assassin heard the sounds of a commotion. The familiar drumming of feet that accompanies the approach to land, crew members rushing from their posts to the prow, shimmying up the rigging or hanging off ropes, shielding their eyes to stare long and hard at the shimmering harbours towards which they were sailing, anticipating adventures ahead. The assassin, too, had adventures ahead of him. Of course, his would likely be markedly different from the escapades fondly imagined by the crew, which no doubt consisted primarily of visiting taverns and consorting with whores. The assassin almost envied them the simplicity of their endeavours. His tasks would be more complicated. He closed Niccolo's journals and pushed the book away from him on the desk, his fingers running across the aging cover, mulling over what he had just learned, the full significance of which, he knew, would take time to make itself known. And then, with a deep breath, he stood, pulled on his robe, secured the mechanism of the blade to his wrist, and pulled up his cowl. Next, he opened the hatch of his quarters to appear on deck, where he too shielded his eyes to cast his gaze upon the harbour as the ship sliced through the sparkling water towards it. People gathered there already to welcome them. Ezio had arrived in the great city. He was in Constantinople. This audiobook was recorded at Chatterbox Audio and produced and published by Penguin Books Limited. Recording copyright 2013.